In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use Cloudflare Tunnels in your Homelab. With this service, you can make internal applications easy accessible on the public internet without any complicated configuration on your router. And that is perfect for anyone who is running applications like personal websites, Homelab dashboards, or basically anything that is web-based, and you want to make it easy accessible from outside your network. So it's definitely going to be interesting for all Homelab people. And by the way, if you want to review all the commands and templates we are covering here in this tutorial, you will find all this stuff on my video documentation on GitHub, link below. I can't wait to show it to you. But before, I quickly want to introduce today's supporter of the video. This video is supported by Warp, a modern and blazing fast terminal application that I'm using on all of my Macs. It has many innovative features and really takes your terminal experience to a whole new level, like it supports multi-cursor input, a block-based command history, or even a built-in artificial intelligence. So if you don't remember the exact command to undo the most recent commits in Git, no problem, just ask the Warp AI and it gives you the actual command you can directly execute. It really makes you so much more productive when you're working in a terminal, so just go and try it out yourself. You can just download and use it completely for free. And if you like to work together in a team, Warp also offers you even more useful features made for professional developers and enterprise companies. Just reach out to the Warp team if you're interested in these advanced features. Of course, you will find a link to their website in the description of this video. Okay, so before we start setting up anything, I want to explain in a bit more detail why Cloudflare Tunnels is so amazing for us Homelab people, and sure, it's also amazing for company networks to expose web-based applications. The main interesting part about Cloudflare Tunnels is that you can access internal services with it, but without poking any holes in your firewall. Usually, when you wanted to access services on an internal network that is protected by a router or a firewall, you would need to allow incoming connections by adding a port forwarding or set up a secured VPN tunnel between the client and your network. And there are many things you need to consider in such a setup, like how to configure your router and firewall, how to protect insecure protocols like HTTP, and create DNS records that would point to your public WAN IP. Not with Cloudflare Tunnels. You don't need any of that. You even don't need to issue any SSL certificates or set up DNS entries. Cloudflare is handling all that for you in a secure tunnel between your Homelab and their cloud infrastructure. You can configure individual subdomains for all your applications, control which users have access to them. They will be automatically protected with a secured HTTPS connection, and the best is it's completely free for up to 1,000 separate tunnels and IP routes per account, more than enough for any Homelab network. To follow this tutorial, you will of course need a Cloudflare account. As I said, it is completely free to get started, so you can just sign up with any email address you want, and then you also need to register a public domain, either directly in Cloudflare. They, by the way, offer a domain registration service as well that I'm also using myself, and they are offering many top-level domains like .com, .net. You can see how many are available here. However, there is a drawback for all the German people like me out there. You will see that the top-level domain .de is still missing in here, so you can't register a public domain with Cloudflare under all the top-level domains that are existing. If that's the case for you, you need to register your desired domain using a different provider, or if you have already done that and registered a domain somewhere else, you need to add it to Cloudflare. So you just go to Add Site, put in your domain name, and Cloudflare will show you instructions on what you need to set up on your provider. Usually this includes changing the name server addresses from the ones of your DNS provider to the addresses of the Cloudflare's name servers. Note that updating these DNS name servers might take some time. It can take up to 24 hours, but mostly it's much faster. Anyway, if you've done that, you should see your domain becoming active in the Cloudflare's dashboard, and you now can use it for setting up subdomains or managing DNS entries, or just like we do it here, use it for Cloudflare Tunnels. The Cloudflare Tunnel settings are located in a different dashboard that's called the Zero Trust dashboard, and here we can start setting up a new Cloudflare Tunnel. I'm going to call it Cloudflare Tunnel Demo 1. Of course, you can give it any name you want. And when you click on Next, it will show you instructions to install a small program in your network that's called the Cloudflare connector. This is the part that initializes a secured reverse tunnel from your internal environment to the Cloudflare servers. You can install this application on various operating systems such as Windows, macOS or Linux. Of course, if you want to have your tunnel always up and running, you should put it on a server somewhere. I'm going to use a Docker container for that, of course. That's just the easiest way to get it quickly up and running in my Homelab. And actually, we could just execute this command here on one of my Linux servers to make this tunnel active. But that's not how I'd like to do it, because as you might know from my other videos, I like to manage my containers with other tools like Docker Compose. Here we can define some additional settings a bit easier, like adding this container to different Docker networks and so on. So I'm going to create a new project folder in my video repository. That's where you can find it later on GitHub. And I just open that with VS Code to create a new file in here that's called the dockercompose.yaml. Of course, we will first start with a version number like 3.9 and then add our first service. Actually, that's the only service that we need. And we just call it Cloudflare Tunnel. Now, I also like to configure a container name. That's not really so important, but makes it a bit easier to identify this later. And we also need to use a recent version of the Cloudflare/Cloudflare-D image. This version that the GitHub Copilot just added is not very up to date, so I would suggest checking the latest version on the Docker Hub first. Just pick one of the recent image tags published by Cloudflare. In this tutorial, I'm, for example, just going to use the tag 2023.2.1. And then I also want to add a restart policy to this container to make sure this Cloudflare tunnel is always initialized even when our server was rebooted. To authenticate successfully to the Cloudflare server, we also need to make sure we add the tunnel token as an environment variable. It's a very sensitive variable that I don't want to put in plain text here. Instead, I'm going to load it into another environment variable on the host system. We also need to specify a command this container should start up with. I just copied the command from the Cloudflare instructions to execute it with tunnel and no auto updates, and don't forget the run at the end. So we now could basically start this container, but there is one important part still missing here, and that's adding this container to all the Docker networks where I'm running the services that I want to expose. This is always needed when you want to expose applications that are running on the same server as the Cloudflare container, because we need to make sure that the connection between all these containers works properly. And using custom Docker networks has the advantage that we can specify the target services later by just using a DNS name instead of an IP address. I always do it like this because IP addresses of containers might change when you restart them, so this is, in my opinion, the most robust way of configuring it. By the way, if you have trouble understanding all this and you're wondering how the Docker networks work, I have explained all of this in much more detail in my other video about Docker networking, so if you're not sure about how that exactly works, go and check out this video. I've put your link to it in the description. For example, on my Docker server, I've got two main custom Docker networks where I usually add all my containers to, the front end and the back end network. And if I want to expose applications that might be located on one of these networks, I should add the Cloudflare container to both of them. And this can be done by adding these networks first to the Compose file itself, but as an external network. Otherwise Docker Compose would try to create them, and then just add a new section to add the container to both of these networks. That should be all. So now we can just copy this compose file to the project folder on my server. I'm using my demo server 1 for this short demonstration where I created a new folder. And after that, I can now switch back to my Mac and copy the compose file via SCP into this directory on the remote server. And here we are. So now we can simply start up the container. But hold on, don't forget to load the tunnel token into the environment variable, otherwise the tunnel won't come up. This can be easily done by executing the export command before you start the container and just copy the tunnel token from the Cloudflare's dashboard instructions into the environment variable according to your compose file. Now let's start this container by executing the docker compose up command and run it in the background. This should now pull the container image and start up the container. Check it once again with the docker ps, and yeah, you can see this container is up and running. When you switch back to the Cloudflare dashboard, we don't need to proceed this setup now. So let's just go back and refresh the tunnel page. You should now already see a second Cloudflare tunnel in here that is called Cloudflare Tunnel Demo 1. And if it's healthy, Cloudflare has successfully connected to your Homelab network. It is now ready to be configured. Okay, so that is how you deploy the Cloudflare Tunnel application on your server. Let's first have a look at how you would typically expose a web-based application. I'm going to quickly deploy a new Nginx web server to demonstrate that. I will give this a new name, something like Nginx Demo 1 for example, and attach this container to the front-end network. That's where the Cloudflare Tunnel application is also connected to. And then we can remove the port forwardings from the Nginx container, because it should be only accessible within the Docker network, not from outside. And after we have set all our settings, we can just deploy it. Once the Nginx container is started successfully, we can now go back to the Zero Trust dashboard of Cloudflare and edit our Cloudflare Tunnel Demo 1. And just go to public host names. This is where you can expose multiple target services on the public internet by just using a host name on your public domain in Cloudflare. So if we want to access our Nginx container, we need to add a subdomain for it first, like Nginx Demo 1 on my public domain sealcreative.de, and then we just need to tell the tunnel which target URL it should connect to. In our case, this Nginx container is using an HTTP protocol, and because it's on the same Docker network, we can just use the container name as a URL. In my case, it's Nginx Demo 1. That should be all. Just one word to the HTTP protocol. As you should know, HTTP traffic is always unencrypted, but the connection is only unencrypted between the Cloudflare Tunnel container and the target URL. Everything that is facing the public internet is covered by a trusted SSL certificate and proxied through Cloudflare with an encrypted HTTPS connection, and that's managed all on the Cloudflare servers. So if your targets are located on the same Docker network, I would not see this as a problem. That's actually the same like with any other reverse proxy like Nginx Proxy Manager or Traefik as well. Let's check if we can access this container from anywhere now. And as you can see, we can now access our Nginx container from outside. That's now possible from all over the world. No matter where you are located, everyone can now access my website. That's really cool. So as I said, this is amazing for exposing any services that are on the same Docker network. It gets a trusted SSL certificate, it gets a host name on your public domain, and if you look at the DNS entry in Cloudflare, it's even not exposing any of your WAN IP addresses. Basically, you can just use the same method to do that with any of your internal services, yeah, even if they are not running on the same machine. You should probably just think about not using plain HTTP connections when you need to connect from one device to another, even when this is all just in your local network. I know we had this discussion before, but I think protecting internal networks is as important as protecting external networks. That's why I'm also using a local DNS server in my Homelab and Traefik as a reverse proxy. All my services only use HTTPS connections, even internally. Mostly they are using trusted SSL SSL certificates as well. And for a short demonstration on how Cloudflare Tunnel will work in this kind of setup, I'm just deploying another Nginx container, but this one is not located on the same server as the Cloudflare Tunnel app. I'm starting this one on my other server, the server production one. And I'll expose these servers in my local network by using Traefik, so I'm removing the port forwardings, but adding the correct labels for Traefik so that it can be exposed with a trusted SSL certificate and an HTTPS connection in my internal network as well. By the way, Traefik is just amazing for that. I'm running this setup on all of my Docker servers and also on all of my Kubernetes clusters. I've recently made a video how to set up all of this stuff on Docker and Kubernetes, so if you're wondering how to use Traefik to secure internal connections as well, then go and check out these videos. I've put your link in the description as well. And as you can see, once I start up this Nginx container, it is accessible in my local network using the DNS name nginxdemo2.serverproduction1 on my home clcreative.de domain. And it also got a valid SSL certificate from the Traefik reverse proxy. You can see that in the certificate details it was issued by Let's Encrypt. Now, if we want to make an application like this accessible to the internet by using the same Cloudflare tunnel like we did before, I need to go back to my Cloudflare dashboard and create a new public hostname. I'm calling it nginxdemo2. This time I'm not selecting the HTTP protocol because it's an HTTPS target, and the URL is the same like you would access it from the internal network. If you're using self-signed certificates on some of your internal services, you need to enable the no TLS verify checkbox. In this case, the Cloudflare Tunnel application won't validate the TLS certificate on your target servers. However, as I just said, I'm using valid SSL certificates because I'm using Traefik, so I have no problem verifying it. And I also want to enable HTTP2 for better performance. Note, all of these settings you need to configure according to what your target service is requiring, so it might be different for other services. Okay, we can now save this and let's go and try to access the second Nginx server through the public URL as well. But as you can see, it's not working and we get back a 404 error. I've researched this for a while in my Homelab by looking at the plain text HTTP requests in Wireshark, and I almost went crazy until I realized it sent a request to the correct internal production server, but with the public hostname nginxdemo2 clcreative.de. And that of course is not known by the Traefik rule. That's why we get the 404 error. And what you need to do to solve this issue is changing the label for the Traefik rule a bit. You can still use the internal rule set, but you need to add a double pipe for a logical OR instruction. So it can still match the internal hostname, but also the external hostname. That of course you need to do on all of the services that are using Traefik and Cloudflare tunnels at the same time. But once you've done that, you can see that the request now works both from an internal request and an external request. And I can now just go and configure all of my applications like this. No, why did I do it this way? Why even bother with Traefik when using Cloudflare Tunnel? Well, mostly because if you already have a working internal setup with Traefik, SSL certificates and a DNS server like me, you don't want to change that. If you are already in your local network, you should also access it locally. And that setup allows you to access all your services securely with HTTPS and valid certificates, no matter if you're coming from your internal network or if you're coming from your external network using a Cloudflare tunnel. And another advantage is you can use Cloudflare tunnels in combination with a load balancer. So that means even though you make one single application accessible on the public internet, the traffic can also be load balanced across multiple servers within your Homelab. That is pretty cool, and in my opinion the most secure and the most flexible way to set it up. It might be a bit more complicated, I agree, but I actually don't want to sacrifice security for my internal network just for convenience. That's why I'm using it this way. Anyway, because we're just talking about security, before I go, we also need to talk about access control. Because currently we have made the Nginx web services accessible for anyone on the internet without any restrictions. And as I said in the beginning, it's not a good practice in general for administrative interfaces, even if they have a user authentication itself. However, I accept that you sometimes just need to do that, I know. And when you just like to make administrative services accessible using a Cloudflare tunnel, you should at least add a secure authentication provider in front of them. To do that, you just need to open the settings menu and head over to authentication. Here you can add multiple providers that offer well-known implementations like Azure AD, GitHub, Google, XAML or Okta. You can just enable what you like and what you're using, but for this demonstration I'll just pick the easiest one, that is the one-time PIN authentication that sends a short mail to you with a time-based one-time password. Remember, we had TOTP covered in a previous video. That's kind of the same thing, just using email. Once you have added this, you can create a new application in the access section. You can create one application for all the subdomains with an asterisk, so that would be active on every of your public host names, but I would rather go and create one application per service. That makes a bit more sense. So in my case, I'm going to create this application only for the Nginx Demo 1 hostname. I'm going to disable the application logo in here because we don't need it. And then you can also specify which authentication providers this application should support. In our case, we just have one, the TOTP pin, and once we go to next, we also need to create a new access policy. Let's just call it Nginx Demo 1 Policy 1. Yeah, I know, I'm not very creative with the names. And when you scroll down, you can configure different rules that define which users should have access to this application. You can, for example, configure specific mail addresses, or you could just add your public domain so that everyone who can receive a mail under your public domain can access this application. I would be a bit careful when you're doing it this way. I think this is just a very basic security setup. Maybe if you'd like to see a more in-depth video about authentication providers and these topics, we could do an additional video. It would be just too much for this one now. So I'm just proceeding with these default settings. Also, the next section I'm going to skip over quickly. Again, please let me know in the comments if you would be interested to have a closer look at these settings. Once you configured your application, you can just go back to your website and check it. As you can see, we have only protected the subdomain Nginx Demo 1, so the Demo 2 application is still accessible by anyone. But when we change it to Demo 1, this hostname is now protected by the Cloudflare authentication provider, and here we are redirected to a website where we now need to add our mail address. And if this mail address is included in the access rules, you should receive a mail with the TOTP pin. Just paste it into the field, and then you can see I now got access to the Nginx server again. So this is basically how Cloudflare Tunnel works. Honestly, I'm still not sure if I'm going to use it in my production setup, because I already have a great way for accessing my internal services with Teleport, and that offers, in my opinion, more interesting capabilities, like it's entirely self-hosted. It also does SSH session recording and support other protocols like RDP, which is a topic I'll make a video about soon, so stay tuned for that. But I think for making any user-facing applications quickly accessible, like personal websites, blogs, or you just want to have a damn simple way to access internal services and you're okay with trusting Cloudflare with your data, I think for these use cases Cloudflare Tunnel is a great solution because it's free. It's very straightforward to configure, and you can still make it very secure with the correct configuration and authentication providers. So go and check it out. If you'd like to see more videos about Cloudflare services in the future, I think we can do that. But I also want to show you some other nice alternatives like Teleport, for example. And I also have something else in the works. Can't talk about it right now, but yeah, this will be also a nice one. As always, thanks everybody for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.